Crazy to think that it's been almost 2 years since I finally played Crisis Core. At the time, I'd dreamed about playing the game for years and experiencing the story of Zack for myself. When I finally finished, I felt nothing but absolute joy at the fact that I was finally able to finish the game for myself. It got to the point that when it came time for my games I played video, I proclaimed that it was my favorite game I played that year. In hindsight though, that may have just been me being excited to play it at all. But now, we have Crisis Core Reunion, a remake/remaster of the original game that allows a whole new audience to experience this story for the first time. I beat this new version, and without the anticipation of experiencing the story for the first time, I was able to figure out my true feelings on this game once and for all. And let me just say this right up front, this is the best version of the game to play. Combat has truly been reinvigorated and brings the game up to pace with Final Fantasy VII Remake. At the same time, it keeps a lot of the unique features from that original PSP game, such as the DMW, which like last time, gives you a random opportunity to use a special move. Though this time, it's much less intrusive, with you being able to skip all attack cutscenes, and the DMW not interrupting gameplay as often as the PSP version. So from a gameplay perspective, this is nothing but an absolute improvement. They even brought back the mission system for doing side quests, and thanks to the improved combat, it's much more addicting here. I found myself getting lost in the simple rhythm of completing these missions. Again, I can't stress how much of a gameplay improvement is here. Even basic attacks are much more responsive and invigorating compared to the original. Aside from combat, the most obvious change is the visuals. Graphically, it's not even a comparison. Compared to the original, Reunion is amazing. Environments especially. There is much more life here compared to the original. Although replaying the PSP version, I was shocked how it held up. Despite being over a decade old, the original is still impressive for being on a handheld. Character models are also impressive, but something doesn't feel right to me about Reunion. They look good, but sometimes their eyes look a bit off to me. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but this little issue doesn't stop the game from being extremely impressive. Square Enix didn't just stop with the gameplay and visuals though. The music even got a revamp, although I don't think it was as drastic a change compared to the Final Fantasy VII Remake and the original PS1 game's soundtrack. Still though, the music is incredible, with the Price of Freedom track not only being my favorite track in the game, but also being one of my favorite video game tracks of all time. There's not really much I have to say about this part of the game, but the same can't be said for the story and characters, of which my thoughts on have changed pretty substantially. As someone who hasn't played the original Final Fantasy VII, I knew enough to understand just how bold Square Enix were to change as much as they did, which is why it's shocking that Crisis Core's story went largely unchanged, especially since looking back on the original, there are parts of the story that should have been changed that weren't. Of course, the main example being, in my opinion, Genesis. For a game being in the Final Fantasy VII universe, and having one of the most iconic villains in gaming history, with Sephiroth, Genesis being quite a bore, and just plain annoying at points, is disappointing to say the least. While his design is pretty sweet, his personality is just him quoting some stupid play every now and then. Like, seriously, 90% of his lines are just him quoting Loveless. Instead of him giving answers to questions we definitely have, he stands there and is like, "I'm more important than whatever is going on here." It's a shame that he stands out like he does, as the rest of the cast I feel is great, especially Zack, who continues to be a standout character. Of course, there is one thing they did change about Zack, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. Back to Genesis. With Final Fantasy VII Rebirth supposedly coming this winter, and this game now being more accessible than ever, I wonder if Genesis will return with Underground. If he does, I think it's time that Square Enix finally gives this character a personality shift. Because in a universe where so many characters feel like real people, and feel so three-dimensional in their portrayals, Genesis sticks out like a sore thumb. But now it's time to talk about the thing that's been discussed more than maybe any other part of this game, the voice acting. This is easily the most controversial part of the game, with most everyone online proclaiming that the new voices are bad and they want the old ones to return. Now, where do I stand on the issue? Well, let's talk about it. Now, the easiest thing for me to say is that the cast who returned from the Final Fantasy VII Remake are maybe the best in the game. Brianna White as Aerith, Britt Baron as Tifa, and Cody Christian as Cloud are still excellent in these roles, and as far as I'm concerned, are the best actors to portray these characters. Now, you may have noticed I left out the other actors who have returned from the remake, and that's because I'll discuss them later. But for now, let's discuss the other actors. For the most part, like FF7 Remake, the new actors sound similar enough to their original voices to not be noticed immediately.
Use brings about wear, tear, and rust. And that's a real waste.
Use brings about wear, tear, and rust. And that's a real waste.
I want you to go and investigate. He will go with you.
Song of the Turks.
This job is looking really gloomy.
Let me know when you're ready to go.
I want you to go and investigate. He will go with you.
Song of the Turks.
This job is looking really gloomy.
Let me know when you're ready to go.
For most of the cast, I never really felt as though one was better than the other, because again, I do think both casts give solid performances as their characters, but that might also be the problem. While I don't necessarily think the performances are bad, most don't stand out, aside from the previously mentioned returning cast. Well, there are two that stand out, but maybe not for the right reasons. Those being Tyler Hoechlin as Sephiroth and Caleb Pierce as Zack. Now, when it comes to Tyler, I don't think he's terrible as Sephiroth. In fact, there are parts where I think he sounds pretty good. Like in the Nibelheim section, I think he's at his best during that part of the game. But George Newbern brought such a gravitas to the role that I think Tyler is kind of missing.
Showing your back to the enemy. Overconfidence will destroy you.
Showing your back to the enemy. Overconfidence will destroy you.
Then there's Caleb Pierce as Zack. And this is where things get complicated. This is because when talking about the original Crisis Core cast, Rick Gomez is usually the one everyone remembers as their favorite, with good reason too. Rick perfectly portrayed the character of Zack, bringing a youthful optimism when needed.
I've recommended you for first.
And Jill! Oh, I love you, man! And Jill!
As well as a level of maturity when it was called for.
Is that your idea of honor?
I also saw a video pointing this out recently, but Rick's voice pitch also works well for the character. His voice had a deeper pitch, which worked for when he was talking to the younger characters. It made it seem like he was an older and wiser mentor that people could look up to, whereas Caleb's naturally higher-pitched voice makes him seem just as young as someone like Cloud, who in some cases now sounds older than Zack.
Is that your idea of honor?
I don't want to call Caleb bad, because he isn't. There are moments where he does the character justice, but it's hard to beat the original. I also feel like most people just hate the idea of change, which is fair enough, I can't argue with you there. But I feel like these new voices still deserve a chance, as they're filling in pretty big shoes. If you still just can't get over the new voices though, there's always mods on the PC version. Overall, Crisis Core is still fun to this day. While the PSP version will always have a special place in my heart, Crisis Core Reunion is the version I would recommend to play now. While some changes may have been unnecessary, this is still the definitive way to experience this classic Final Fantasy VII title.